Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. So as promised, now I'm posting the full interview that the four of us, me, Matt Money, Scotto and Dave G have done with CEO of Rocket Lab, Sir Peter Beck and Adam Spice, CFO of Rocket Lab. This is the full version of the interview. I know all of us are going to post it on our channels at the same time. The questions were coordinated to make sure that we don't ask the same questions from them. I think all of us asked super good questions. There's super good data in this interview, and it's really worth to watch it in one go. I again have to apologize for the camera quality. It was on my side, it was recorded on a new platform to me. It was Scotto who was recording, and something went wrong and my camera is worse than usual. I know it's pretty bad, but not as bad as on that video. Sir Peter Beck also had camera issues. He said at the end of the interview that he notices that the camera makes it look like he's going to heaven. And, you know, it was recorded on a day when the Rocket Lab stock was up 13%. So maybe that wasn't a filter. We just, you know, when the stock is up 13%, the CEO does kind of look like he's going to heaven. Anyways, all jokes aside, you're not here for the production quality. There's very, very good data in this interview. Please make sure you're subscribed to this channel, and please make sure you subscribe to the other three guys' channel as well. And please enjoy this interview. All right, so welcome everyone to a very special interview. We have here with us Sir Peter Beck, the CEO of Rocket Lab, and Adam Spice, the CFO of Rocket Lab. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat with retail investors. We really appreciate it. And congratulations on a very good quarter.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks, guys. Yeah.
All right, so I will go ahead and ask a few questions. I think this first one will be to Peter. So we know that you're planning to land the first Neutron on a drone ship, and we know that generally you expect things once they're on the pad to work. But we are wondering what is the chances that you're going to be able to propulsively land on the first try? Or how many tries do you think it will take before we have a reusable Neutron?
Yeah, well, you've kind of called out pretty much the only thing we haven't done before. So, you know, I think we should level set expectations there that there's some undoubtedly some learnings there. The intent is to do a soft splashdown actually on the first one, not try and hit the barge. So you know, that will be the intent, and I think it's just a safer way to learn a lot, because when you put obviously a bit of steel between you and the rocket, if you haven't got it quite right, it could be pretty damaging to that asset. So the plan for the first one is to do a soft splashdown and learn what we need to learn there. But I mean, at least in simulation, the GNC team have been flying and landing Neutrons now for quite some time, and it's always cool to go past the hardware in the loop rig and see all the actuators actuating and it doing its thing and landing. But it's probably one of the things that we've never demonstrated before. So we'll kind of step our way into it.
Do you have an idea of how many tries do you think it will take, like 5 launches or 8 launches before you can propulsively land and reuse the rocket?
Well, look, we're hoping for 1. I mean, that's the target. But it doesn't always work out that way in this game. But that's certainly the target.
Awesome. All right. Then the next question, it might be to you or Adam. So there seems to be a trend that more and more countries are launching their own space programs. For example, Canada has recently announced their own. The EU is investing a lot in its space systems, but it seems like that these countries are increasingly favoring their own launch providers, even if they are way back in the development, way behind Rocket Lab or the other existing players. And my question is, do you see this as a headwind, or will you need to open up local launch pads, like for example in the EU, to be able to get those contracts?
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of countries want sovereign launch capability, and we've always said to countries, there's kind of a minimum number of launches that you need to put a pad in to make it viable. And we've had these discussions with lots of countries around the world who want to attract us in particular to create a sovereign launch capability. But the conversations generally taper off pretty quickly when you explain to them that they have to bring their own sovereign launch, because there's no point in us going to, say, Europe and building a pad and then cannibalizing our manifest from other or bringing our own customers along to fly out of that pad, because it's just another pad that you have to amortize the cost of. So if a sovereign wealth nation wants sovereign launch, they have to bring sovereign payloads, and that's generally where the conversations end, because most sovereign nations actually don't have a big pipeline of sovereign payloads.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for the color on that one. The next one is definitely to Adam. You were on a conference last quarter, and you got a question about the backlog, and you said that you managed to almost double the backlog every year, and the internal goal is to still double, to go from 1 billion to 2 billion. However, at the end of Q2, the backlog was slightly going up, and the retail community is hoping that this is because there's a huge pipeline of very lumpy contracts that still might come in this year, which would balloon the backlog to 2 billion. Can you give a little, I know that you cannot say if it is definitely the case, but could you give us a little color on how you see the backlog developing for Rocket Lab?
Yeah, I know we have our oars in the water on big opportunities all the time, right? Commercial, government, across space systems and across launch. So if you look at the types of deals that we're going after, it doesn't take a lot of squinting to see how you could double your backlog from 1 billion to 2 billion in a relatively short period of time. I think the difficult thing is trying to predict, and I don't think it's a question of if, it's just a matter of when, right? And I think you don't stop at 2 billion, you go to 4 billion, and you keep going as you grow the company. But I think that the timing of these awards is very difficult to predict. I think on the space system side, obviously, there's been a lot of focus lately on the SDA opportunities, which has really created these new scaled platforms for new entrants like ourselves. And I think that just the timing of those are really difficult to nail down. But when they come in, like this last one for SDA beta was $515 million. So you just need one of those, that kind of gets you halfway to your goal. And then, as we start to unlock opportunities for Neutron, now that we've gotten past some of these key kind of proof points, especially with the hot fire test, those types of deals are also not looking at likely to be onesie, twosie launch deals, but much more kind of, volume deals to tie up capacity on Neutron for some period of time. So to me, it's just inevitable that we'll be able to kind of build that kind of backlog. The question is, can it be done before the end of this year? I think that's kind of an artificial constraint that we probably don't really kind of operate under internally. It's just more like we'll sign the deals when they're ready to be signed, and naturally, given the size of deals, it creates lumpiness to the growth and backlog. But I think we all feel incredibly comfortable that the backlog is going nowhere but up.
Awesome, thank you so much for the color on that. So my last question is to Peter. So I've been reading a lot of space articles, and it seems like having your own constellation used to be a very big thing, and it was like a few governments who could only have a few constellations. In the articles I was reading, I read that the Army and the Navy wants to have their own communication constellation because they feel that it's too much administration to share it between them. Greece wants to have an own constellation to monitor the sea, and there's more and more companies and governments that want it. And this space infrastructure that we are all looking forward to in Rocket Lab's future, could it be that it will be multiple constellations? And could it be that the Army pays you, like they come to you and they say that, look, we need you to fix this service. We want secret communication here, and we pay upfront for the constellation, and you just operate it?
Yeah, look, there's all kind of machinations of the model, as you kind of point out, and yeah, as you say, there's a tremendous amount of kind of growth from the government sector, and we're obviously trying to push very hard this model of just procuring a service rather than procuring satellites or procuring launch. And the recent kind of Victus mission that we signed is a great example of that, where they didn't buy a satellite, the government didn't buy a satellite, they didn't buy a launch, they actually bought, in the end of the day, it's a piece of data from a satellite rendezvous. So that's certainly where we're pushing things, and frankly that's where I think it will all go, not just from a government perspective, but from a commercial perspective as well. Because if you look across some of the large tech companies who now have a footprint in space, they're not kind of natural owners of space assets, and kind of it's very, very difficult to own these assets and orbit and operate them. You have to become somewhat of experts to even procure a launch. So that's where it's all going to go, in our opinion, and we're just making sure that we are going to be the preferred provider of that by having the ability to build any kind of satellite at scale, and of course Neutron is key to be able to launch it at scale as well.
All right, thank you so much for the color on this one. That was all my questions, so we can go to the next speaker.
All right. Yeah, thanks for taking the time of talking to us. In terms of my first question, I was wondering a little bit about how you see the sort of medium to heavy launch market shaping up. So right now it looks like there's a lot of, demand that needs to be addressed, but there's also several rockets all coming online or scheduled to come online around the same time. Do you think there's room for them all? Is there different niches? Is it like a winner take most scenario? How do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I have the privilege or sin, depending on which way you want to look at it, of seeing this play out exactly once before.
Yeah.
When we started small launch, it looked exactly like this, and you had a cadre of all kinds of folks, some further advanced, some behind, some with way more capital. And the good thing about this game is that ultimately it doesn't really matter how many videos and presentations of starriness you have, or in fact how much capital you have. It's like the ultimate leveler. Physics doesn't care about any of that, engineering doesn't care about any of that. And I think the biggest mistake a lot of companies make is they try and build a rocket and not build a business. And everybody has their own little niche. And as I kind of cast my eye out, across the competition and the emerging developments of medium launch, it looks very, it's almost like deja vu. In some cases, it's the same players, right? So, well, in most cases, it's the same players. So, look, I think this will shape up exactly like small launch, and a lot of competitors, haven't really learned the lesson of building a company and not just building a rocket. So, you might get one to the pad, and then you're kind of one and done sort of a thing. But as we've always talked about, the hard thing here is not the first one or two or five. It's even 10. It's like, how do you really build a sustainable production system and a reliable vehicle that customers want to fly on? So I think it'll shake down like it always does, and it'll end up in relatively small digit numbers of folks.
Okay. Yeah, maybe just to follow up, would you say one of the best differentiators for Neutron would be like the production system and reliability, or is there other factors you think have going for you?
There's a whole bunch there. We've had the advantage of operating a vehicle and flying it at volume and achieving a cadence, and that really fundamentally feeds into the design of the vehicle as well. And there's so many lessons are learned on Electron that we've rolled into Neutron. So many things like an Electron that would just really suck. We go, man, if we ever had a chance to do that again, we'd never do that. And we have a chance to do that again. And then, the architecture of Neutron, we think is really, really unique. Having that second stage kind of out of the load path, tucked away inside the fairing there, just makes that such a inexpensive high performance upper stage that we think is is really important. And then just the operational things, not throwing away fairings, and then all of the kind of the geometry of the vehicle to reduce heating. So heating is your enemy with respect to reuse. So there's just a million things that have gone in there, but it also rolls up in the back of all the production systems that we have in place, and all of the launch kind of learnings and infrastructure. So I think if you're developing a new vehicle and you don't have that experience, I think that's a real tough learning on a big rocket.
Yeah, I bet. Turning to small launch, I'm kind of curious. It looks like a lot of rockets that are trying to be up and coming are looking more at like a 1-ton payload kind of range. Would you consider that to be a direct competitor to Electron? Is that almost like a different market segment? How do you think about those?
Well, look, I mean, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the ideal payload lift was going to be, with Electron and Neutron, to be honest. And our view of the 1 ton, it's kind of a no man's land, because if you look at Electron, I mean, Electron has been incredibly successful. If you look at the payloads that we're lifting, they're all sort of in that 200 kg class sort of stuff. So the whole reason someone comes to a dedicated rocket is because they want a dedicated rocket. So putting a 200 kg payload in a 1 ton lift class, I just don't see how you can be economic to be able to compete with a smaller 300 kg lift class. So then the argument you can make is, well, okay, maybe it's a better rideshare vehicle. I mean, that's a terrible rideshare vehicle, because now you're competing with a Falcon 9, and there's just no way you can compete with that. So we really think that's sort of in a bit of a no man's land, and it's too small to be a useful rideshare vehicle and too big to be a dedicated vehicle. Like I say, it's not really in a class of its own. It's kind of out in the wilderness of it in its own, really, in our opinion.
Okay, yeah, I guess time will tell how that plays out. In terms of space systems, I'm kind of curious about the solar market. So when I think of Solero, I kind of think of very high-end bespoke hardware. But then I look at some of these mega constellations coming online, and they seem to be going for, cheap stuff because it's not lasting as long in orbit. Are you interested in going after that kind of mega constellation market, or is that sort of different from what Solero would shoot for?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, that a lot of the mega constellations run silicon cells. They're cheap and cheerful, and which there is a point in which that breaks, because you have a power requirement, and they're so much less efficient, especially at end of life, that you end up with these really big wings, or solar panels hanging out the side of your spacecraft. Of course, they create a lot of drag. To counteract that drag, you need electric propulsion to keep, to orbit keep. And of course, electric propulsion requires electrical power. So, you end up at some point in this spiral of doom where you just keep having to put bigger and bigger panels to counteract the drag. So there is a point that it breaks. But yeah, I mean, the kind of solar that we do at Solero is significantly more expensive just by the nature of the raw materials. Outside of mega constellations, just about every spacecraft uses this, the more space hardened solar cells for a variety of reasons. Not just having small wings, but orbital lifetime. So the radiation tolerance of those cells and whatnot. So yeah, if you have a mega constellation, you expect it to survive on orbit for a few years. And you're not too worried about the kind of degradation of silicon, then it's always going to win. But almost everything else in the space industry will require the more traditional cells.
Right. Okay. And then I just saw in the news recently there was a breaking up of a Chinese rocket, and I think there was an event recently with a Russian satellite breaking up as well. Just kind of checking in. How concerned are you about space debris? And do you think there's a market there in the future for Rocket Lab? I guess that there already sort of is with Astroscale, but a growing market for you guys to take advantage of down the line?
Yeah, I mean, space debris is something we're always keen to talk about. We think, you know, we're generally, as an entrepreneur, I'm not kind of advocating for regulation, but this is an instance where I certainly do, and I think you know, it is something we're all going to have to tackle and challenge. But you know, there are going to be events like the one you just saw with the Chinese, right? There'll be accidents in orbit, and there'll be these kind of events, and you know, really a global traffic management system is required. So we're certainly you know, a supporter of that. And then with respect to a business, yep. So you did see some stuff from Astroscale, as you point out, but you know, I think it's a challenging business model to go up to orbit and pull stuff down.
Right. And then I'm kind of curious on the Neutron front. So down the line, once you eventually do start launching your own satellites, do you have any idea of what kind of the breakdown would be between launching your own stuff versus customers, or how that would ramp up?
Well, I mean, it's too early to say. I mean,
Right.
I've always said that 50% of the reason why we're building a Neutron is to launch other people's stuff, and 50% is to launch our own. Now, if you look at our friends over at SpaceX, I think somewhere between 80 and 90% of all their launches is for themselves. So it really depends on the application and how many satellites are kind of required. But either way, you know, there still has to be an alternative to, you know, essentially one provider in the medium launch capacity for everybody else.
Sure. Okay, thanks, guys. That was great. I will pass it on to Matt.
All right, thanks, Dave. Yeah, just want to say it's been a blast watching you guys over the past 3 years, and you guys have really started to educate me a lot more. You know, some of the things I'm like, why are they doing that? And it just completely, as we evolve, makes more and more sense over time. So thank you guys for that. It's been a blast for the past 3 years, and I hope it'll be the same fun for the next 30. So let's get Adam involved a little bit here. So for the Rocket Lab owned Constellation, can you guys give a little bit more color on the payback period or expected revenue you guys would receive from those launches, right? Because I'm just trying to think, like, obviously we're going to try to go to the market at 50 to 60 million for Neutron, maybe more, but at a cost, right? Maybe it's 20 to 30 million once we're kind of up and running, assuming kind of like a 50% gap or some gap margin or something like that. But my thought process is, you guys have obviously given thought as to how profitable that constellation would be. My thought process is if you're launching your own Neutron, you know, how much and how long would it take to kind of pay back? What kind of returns you're expecting?
That's a good question. I think that, you know, there's different economics that start to come into play when you think about launching your own stuff, right? So if you look at how a constellation operator addresses the cost of launch, they typically capitalize that with the cost of the satellite, right? And they amortize that over time, or depreciate that over time. You know, the same thing would apply, you know, for us as well. So I think the satellite economics are going to have to stand on their own. I think the value that we would bring to the table is we'd have, you know, unfettered, you know, access to launch, and of course, you know, if we chose to subsidize that for our own we could certainly do that. But at the end of the day, you know, we're going to optimize for the overall business. So if somebody's willing to give us better margin to launch their stuff than to launch our own stuff in the grand scheme of things, of all the streams of income, we're gonna value optimize for what's best for the shareholder. And so right now we really can't tell you what that's going to be. You know, we can kind of look at what the example right now with SpaceX is, right? As Pete mentioned, they launch a tremendous amount of their own stuff, and that comes with a whole bunch of advantages, because one of the challenges with operating a rocket company or a space company is the fact that there's very, very high fixed costs. And fixed cost absorption is a huge driver of profitability and your margin profiles. And so even if you're not recognizing revenue from an internal launch, you're getting the benefit of that cadence that applies to the launches that you are charging for. And then, of course, you get the benefit also of having less capitalized costs that gets, you know, kind of taken to the program over time against margin. So lots of goodness happens when you tie launch and kind of constellation ownership together. And I think, you know, we've kind of seen that with the way that SpaceX has kind of rolled out their business.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. So that seems a lot of fun. I guess I did have some questions as well. So going back to the September 2022 Investor Day, right? So going back about 2 years at this point, there was not a capsule announcement, but we're looking into it. So I want to ask basically, is there an opportunity for Neutron to be involved in the Artemis missions in the future? And what is the conclusion of that we're looking into it part? Could the second stage of Neutron be used for astronaut transport?
Yeah, I mean, so the reason why we had that there was we're always asked, you know, you're going to do human space flight and all the rest of it. And so Neutron is able to be certified for human space flight. You know, and the reason why that's important is because you design the vehicle from day one differently. You know, safety factor in you know, tank pressure margins and stuff like that, which are very difficult to go back and, you know, change the safety factor of a tank. So we've designed it to be human rateable, and we're certainly not ruling that out. But you know, as of right now, you know, our view is that there is not really a market. There's one destination. There's kind of 1.5 suppliers already for that one destination. So there's just no business case to do it. Now, in the future, there could be other destinations and other customers. So we're kind of spring loaded to be able to do it. But for right now, you know, it just doesn't make sense. But we wanted to make sure that people understood that we're thinking about it.
No, that's very clear. I appreciate that. That's really clean. So question about the HASTE missions, and I know that Scotto might have some questions as well. Actually, before that, I want to talk about the LOXSAT. So that's potentially a technology where you're going to be able to potentially refuel with ETA in the future. So I was wondering, you know, is that going to be potentially used for the future Artemis missions, or what is exactly NASA really thinking about that for? Or do you see potential for you guys internally to potentially think about using that technology going into the future?
Yeah, so our role in that mission is primarily, you know, one of launch and also kind of hosting, really. So what NASA are trying to do there is understand long-term storage of cryogenic fluids in orbit, mainly for the Gateway program. So if you're hanging out in a kind of a pseudo-lunar orbit, stationing yourself there to go to Mars, you need to be able to hold these cryogenic propellants there for a long period of time. So Space has got a method of holding these cryogenic propellants for a long period of time, and we're providing the spacecraft and the launch and all of that to kind of validate it. So in a lot of respects, it's got a similar sort of flavor to it, you know, as a VADA mission, where, you know, they have a capsule, but we kind of do everything else. So you know,
okay.
that's really the point of those.
That makes sense. And then the last one that I have, and I know Scotto, I think, might have some follow-up on this one. So we have several HASTE missions between now and the first quarter for multiple different clients. I guess my question is, do you see this being the next unlocker for the larger backlog for Electron and HASTE? Because I feel like we've had the one launch in June of 23. It's kind of gone silent, but we have multiple things kind of incoming, right? 3 to 4 different clients that we're going to be looking at. And I feel like that's going to be the next tranche of backlog that we're going to be adding for Electron and HASTE.
Yeah, so the HASTE missions are interesting because if you think about that we'll call it a market, but it's really a capability. It's been completely stifled with extremely high cost launch, really infrequent test opportunities, and wind tunnels that you know, you book yourself years in advance to get into. So we turn up with a rocket that's just ready to go, and there's a whole bunch of, you know, programs and payloads, and, you know, I would say that whole community is in a state of, you know, how do we take use of this opportunity as quickly as we can? And, you know, changing the kind of perspective from it takes me a year to test this thing to we can test this thing next week, you know, is a different paradigm for all of those organizations and government departments to shift to. So it's been a real enabler for that community, and look, I think you'll see a lot more happening there in the near future. I think we've disclosed we have something like 7 HASTE launches on backlog already. There's a bunch of them coming down the production line, and as you mentioned, it's not just one defense customer. It's multiple kind of agencies that are taking advantage of these flight opportunities.
Yeah, and I guess that follows up with, I know it's early days, right? But what do you think the capacity could be for HASTE specifically? Is it going to be, I guess, competing for Electron sort of slots, or is it kind of independent of that? And then second of that question, is that specifically going to only be out of Wallops, or is there an opportunity for other people around the world at different US bases, et cetera, to be able to use that technology?
Yep, no, it won't just be out of Wallops. It'll be out of other sites as well. We don't necessarily have a capacity problem, right? We'll just keep flexing the production line to keep building more. I mean, when we put the Electron production line in place, we put it in place to support a pretty high cadence. So it's not like we have to buy any machines or any infrastructure. It's just few more techs and people to flex production. So I would never worry about that in that sense. But and then from a capacity of the vehicle, it's basically unlimited, because we're not we're only using a small amount of the lift of its capability. When you take off the second stage or take the requirement away to go to orbit, that the Electron can loft anything that they can throw at us.
I would just say thank you guys. It's been a blast for the last 3 years. Can't look forward enough to the next 30 years looking at you guys. Thank you again for educating us so much. And I'm gonna hand it over to Scott. I'll just be in the background. Thank you guys again so much.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Matt. Before we move away from the Electron, I just had a follow-up regarding 5 launches on the Q2 presentation that were previously unannounced. One of those being the HASTE launch and the other 4 being the confidential Constellation customer. What's the expected time frame for these 5 launches, like a year even?
Well, each of them are different. So typically the HASTE launches have a pretty long lead on them, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into one of those launches. And as I mentioned, the typical customer is used to operating at a different cadence than we are, or they have been used to. And then the four commercial launches, like in any kind of multi-launch deal, they're spread over a period of time, depending on their deployment of Constellation or when their business needs them to come online, which is generally the case. Even like Synspective with that big deal, that's spread over a couple of years as they deploy their Constellation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, and then moving into space systems, it was mentioned that the space systems backlog as of June 30th is 773 million. How much of this backlog is related to merchant components, and what is the approximate revenue rate in Q2 for the merchant components?
Oh, that's an Adam question.
So I would say that of that backlog, I would say about 150 million of the space systems backlog is on the systems and the subsystems and component side of the house. I guess what was the other question? Part of the question?
The revenue run rate for the merchant components.
Yeah. So yeah, that's also running about $150 million a year, is roughly. So if you can think about the elements of the business, and that business has been growing about 20% a year on a pretty consistent basis. We started that business we actually started organically where we developed our first Photon, but then very quickly, we acquired Sinclair Interplanetary to get the reaction wheels and the star trackers and the sun sensors, and then quickly followed that up, with ASI to get command and control software, and then the PSC separation systems business, and then again with Solero. So those are all businesses that have actually done really quite well under our ownership, grown pretty much along expectations that we counted on when we kind of did the valuations and kind of closed those deals. So we're very happy with the merchant component part of the business. It's a pretty predictable, higher margin, kind of stable part of the business.
Cool. And then following Q1 earnings, it was mentioned that Rocket Lab has one customer receiving north of 2,000 reaction wheels this year. So satellites, as I understand, generally require 3 to 4 reaction wheels each. So this shows that Rocket Lab has a capacity to provide reaction wheels for roughly 500 craft per year. If we were to look at the other satellite components that Rocket Lab provides, are they in par with how many craft per year can be provided for? So in other words, within the current manufacturing footprint, how many satellites are you capable of providing for and ultimately producing?
That's well, I mean, as you point out from a reaction wheel standpoint, we're golden for that particular class or size of reaction wheel. And in other areas, we already have really high volume, like solar. We have we produce many kilowatts of solar a year. So solar is something that we have a huge volume on. And then there's kind of other components like radios that kind of a lower lower volume. We might do 20 or 30 of those a year. So there's this kind of differing kind of volumes. But I think the key takeaway here is that one of the things that always frustrated me with the space industry is that the majority of those components are supplied by kind of ma and pa shops, all at subscale. And frankly, that's why we started to buy a bunch of component businesses, is because whenever we started to build something, the lead times were too long and the cost was too expensive. And kind of, as Adam just pointed out, like we're very happy with the businesses that we bought. We bought them, we didn't just sit on them, we scaled them. Really, what we're trying to do is position ourselves for our own stuff as well at scale. So, if we want to do something for ourselves at scale, then it's not a big lift.
And then it was recently announced that Rocket Lab will receive $24 million from the CHIPS Act, then another 25 from the state of New Mexico. How can we expect these grants to be recognized? Would it be similar to, would they be recognized against R&D, for example?
Well, it's a mix of things. So it's a combination of loans. So you have low interest loans, you've got grants, and you have credits, tax credits. And so in some cases, in many cases, we actually collect or get value for the cash, even though we're in a net operating loss kind of situation right now with a deferred tax asset on the books. We get some real-time cash benefit from those tax credits and awards that we've been kind of negotiating with those parties. So it's really kind of across the board. I think what you really find is, for the most that what we're doing there, it's the cost. It's kind of enabling the cost to build out a new reactor fleet and all the facility stuff around that. So really what it does is it offsets the CapEx to a great extent. So, and from a P&L perspective, we're still going to have to take even though we got the capital in some cases for quote unquote free, we still don't escape the accounting implications of having to depreciate those assets through the P&L. But that's a good problem to have, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then moving on to the Neutron, or I guess moving back to the Neutron. Earlier this year, it was mentioned that we can expect Neutron spend of roughly $100 million throughout the rest of this year to get us to Neutron's first flight. Since then, Neutron has been pushed out, we'll call it 6 months, give or take. Are we still looking at that same $300 million ballpark to get us to Neutron's first launch? And following Q2, how much of an investment is remaining to get us to that first launch?
Yeah. So the one thing that's been pretty remarkable about this program since we announced it back in 2021 is the fact that the budget really hasn't moved, and the timescale has moved out a bit. We had that 6-month push that we experienced, a couple quarters ago. So we're still very much in that $300 million range. We were kind of trending to be about $25 million under budget before the slip, and the result of the slip cost us about $20 million because we're carrying about 2 quarters of just the pure kind of R&D headcount without any revenue cover and so forth. So the kind of explicit cost of the delay was about $20 million, but we're still within that $300 million overall program bogey. To date, there's been about, if you look at, it gets a little bit muddy because we've had co-investment from other parties. So we had obviously a $24 million co-investment in helping develop the upper stage as part of the spec OTA program with the DoD. And we've also gotten some very helpful assistance from Virginia Space in building out the infrastructure at Wallops. So if you kind of take across kind of what's been spent on Neutron to date, including by third parties, we're probably looking at a little over maybe $210 million of spend to date. And so if you look going forward, we still, again, a good chunk of that was supported from other players. I don't think we're going to spend the full $300 million to get to first launch. I think we're going to be a little under that. And then as we go past the first test launch and into production, that's when we'll kind of hit that bogey of $300 million. And then longer term, of course, we're going to have to continue to invest in the business like in any business, right? To expand capacity and add more features and capabilities, not only to the rocket, but also for the infrastructure. But long story short, we're in great shape. We're on target. Costs look very good at this point.
And then as a follow-up to Neutron's first launch, what can we expect in terms of CapEx and R&D for the Neutron going forward? Would it still be split roughly 50-50 between CapEx and R&D, similar to what we see currently?
No, I think you're going to see a trailing off of R&D spend. I mean, there'll still be some R&D spend, for sure, but it'll step down significantly once we get past that first launch and heading into the first paid launch. But CapEx is going to be it'll shift more towards probably, I'd say probably like 75% of the spend related to Neutron after we get past first launch will be infrastructure, and the other will be R&D. And Pete, if that sound about right to you as well?
Yeah, no, that sounds about right to me. Yeah, yeah, cool. Yeah, it'll look fairly similar to Electron, with the caveat, of course, that it's a new vehicle, and we always hope your first flight goes well, but
yeah, we haven't had to spend a lot of money on Electron R&D since we kind of got that vehicle to market. Certainly, we put some into reusability, right? So I think that's been an area that consumed incremental R&D dollars. But for the most part, and then we've just released some new battery capabilities on the vehicle. So those, I think, between batteries and reusability, those are really kind of the only two areas that I'm aware of that required some kind of post-initial launch R&D commitment. And the rest has really been about kind of facilitizing. So, adding another launch pad at LC1, adding the launch facility at Wallops. But for the most part, we kind of went on a bit of an R&D holiday post introducing that product to the market.
Sounds good. So we're coming up on our time, so I'll just ask one last question. Well, I'll try to squeeze a few more in, or a few together, if you don't mind. So speaking of these Electron updates, during the broadcast of the 51st Electron launch, it was mentioned that there was this new generation battery system on the second stage that allows for an increased payload capacity on Electron. With this upgrade in mind, what is the updated maximum payload capacity for the standard Electron? And similarly, what's the maximum payload capacity for a recovery Electron? And I'll also just squeeze in, is there still recovery plans for the Electron this year?
Yeah, good questions. So the new battery was really, I would say a much more refined solution to we call it the Beast, which was during the anomaly, we basically encased all high voltage electronics in a pressure vessel, so that it was just like it was impossible for that to ever occur. That added mass to the upper stage. So we went back and we redesigned that in a much more elegant way. And these new batteries actually had been in a development program, kind of ticking off to the side anyway. So it's in part to improve the performance of the vehicle from that Beast modification. Also, we do have some more performance there with the batteries. As far as a payload percentage increase, it's not like 10%. It's single digit percentages. But I'd say it's also early days because this is a new battery, so we're certainly not stressing it in any sense. But the biggest advantage with the change in the battery was actually not on the second stage; it was on the first stage. Because the first stage batteries, typically what they would at the end of a first stage burn, they're not able to be reused. I mean, we basically turn those batteries inside out on the first stage. But with this new battery, we don't do that anymore. And part of the reason for the battery change was to enable us to reuse the first stage and just charge them back up and fly again. So that was kind of the original impetus of the battery program, which kind of goes back to your other question is about reusability. And there's a vehicle core sitting in the production line right now that is that's been reused and is kind of working its way through the production line. But one of the things that we decided to do this year is, for two reasons, is kind of put that to the back of the importance queue. For firstly, we don't want to. Anytime you introduce change down on the production floor, it really messes with production. So the team are just trying to we've doubled production so far in this half of this year. And anybody who does any production, if you tell them that you double that's a meaningful thing to do. So we just didn't want to introduce another kind of product and kind of inconvenience down on the line. Cadence has a much bigger effect to margin than reusability, so it's much more important that we hit cadence than particularly reusability. And also the reusability team is far better deployed right now working Neutron. That if you look at like bang for the buck for the company, having those folks working Neutron recovery and reusability is just far more important. So it's just a series of priority decisions really. But in time that vehicle will go through, whether it's this year or next year, I think it's hard to say. But it's certainly not the highest priority for the business on Electron.
Cool. Adam, Peter, thank you for your time today. I'll pass it back to Vince.
Cheers.
Yes, so thank you so much for speaking directly to retail investors. It's actually very few companies that do that, so we really appreciate you guys. And we collectively think that you did a very good job on the last presentation. It was really going over, we feel, misunderstood things about Rocket Lab. And congratulations on this quarter. And we're really looking forward to hearing great news from the company and the first Neutron launch.
Thanks, guys. No, we really appreciate the support. And I've noticed that my camera has me looking like I'm ascending to heaven or some divine spirit. So I apologize, and I will replace my camera for this next one. I don't understand the white balance, but
it only happens on days when the stock is up 13%. Then you look like you're going to heaven. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
cheers.
Thank you, guys.
See ya.
See you next time.